All right, good morning. Good morning. I see Fish and Golf beat you to the punch, Uncle Steve. You gotta draw fast if you're gonna get up for Fish and Golf. He's on it. So we're gonna talk about schools this morning, and I'm once again going to remind you that your children should be protected from the existential threat that is the public school system. So let's do this. All right. Good morning, everybody. And Sergeant Major joins says he's watching in the car. Old man, I recommend you keep your eyes on the road, as life comes at you fast. So this morning, I was flipping around looking for something to talk about, and it's Mellow Monday. We're supposed to take it easy, you know. I don't want to talk about the White House replacing Easter with the Trans Day of Visibility because screw you if you are a person. I don't want to talk about Russians mass deporting Muslims after the mass casualty event over there last week. I don't want to talk about bad news stuff. And like I've talked about before, it's hard to find good news in the news. So this morning, I've got this story, and the headline is this. This researcher asked kids, what's wrong with U.S. schools? And here are their ideas. Now, before I dig into that, because it's Mellow Monday, and I just said something about how it's hard to find good news, I'm going to talk about that for just a minute. It is hard to find good news. And the old adage, of course, is if it leads, it bleeds. And it sounds really cynical and pessimistic to look at the news that way, that, oh, well, you know, people don't care about good news, they care about bad news. Well, fundamentally, yes, that is true. And there's a good reason for that. There's a very good evolutionary reason for that, a very good tactical and primitive reason for that. You care about and are interested in bad news because good news doesn't affect you, right? Good news is, hey, we're all happy that Cindy got a new puppy. We're all happy that we had a great Easter weekend and saw the family and everything. That's all great, and we feel good about it. It's awesome. And you know what? As a consequence of that good feeling, as a consequence of that celebration, there is no action required of us to guarantee our future good or to guarantee our future survival. Now, quite contrarily, if something bad happens, there very well may be a direct impact on you. See, with the good news, the direct impact has already happened. Good news is news about the outcome or the consequence of something. Bad news is about something that has yet unstated or undiscovered consequences. For example, if there is a mass casualty event, a school shooting, etc., then let's say you live in Georgia and it happened in Washington State. Well, It may be that's the other side of the country from you, but I've got in-laws and family in Washington State. It might have an effect on them. I might need to get on the phone and ask if everybody's okay. Now, if I know that none of my in-laws or family in Washington State are in a public school or frequent shopping malls or whatever the mass casualty event is related to, then that might not be an immediate concern. But how the response of the local community and government might affect my family and friends is another matter altogether. Let's say you've got family and friends in a location where there was a natural disaster, right? The consequences are yet unseen. So you're more interested in bad news because it might actually require something of you. Right? A hurricane hits somewhere and blows all the houses down in a community where you've got family or friends. You might have to get on the phone and say, "Yo, I've got a spare bedroom if you need it. I can come pick you up if you need me to." Or at least get on the phone and say, "Hey, are you okay?" Right? You may not even be in a position to help, but you might want to know that your friends and family are okay and safe. That's the basic crux of the issue, why it's difficult to find good news. And in part, that's why I'm trying really hard to do this Mellow Monday thing, where I try to cover good news topics. And like I said, it's hard to find good news, and it's even harder to find good news that's interesting. And so a lot of the time, I'm gonna find stuff that, if it's not good news, or if there's not something immediately positive we can take away from it, I'm just gonna try to avoid the big everything's on fire stories to the best of my ability. Now, this one, the story that I'm about to cover, kind of misses that mark, because while we're about to deal with it in kind of a lighthearted way, the fact is that the American education system is metaphysically on fire. It is an absolute train wreck of child abuse. The entire American education system is a monetized and disgusting intentional application of psychological abuse and neglect. And that, I know that's a pretty bleak picture. Now, what we can look at and take some hope from is that outside of the US, there are schools that are doing things that are better. And what I hope you guys can take away from this episode is, if we look at what some other countries are doing, maybe we can learn something about how to conduct our homeschool environments to guarantee that our own children, where to the greatest extent possible, have a more valuable education. Now, I've said often, I went to public school in the 90s, right? I mean, 80s and 90s. I graduated high school in 2000. And when I was in school, when I was attending a public school, my teachers had the common decency to merely be insufficient to the task. They were only inadequate, right? But they weren't malicious. Today, there are a large number of teachers that are actively working to cause your children harm. And when I say that, I'm not just talking politics. I'm not just talking about mutating their worldview so that they're a little more lefty or a little more commie or a little more likely to vote Democrat, or some other thing that might have a broad and eventually destructive slow walk problem. No, they're actively encouraging this inclusion in the LGBT community as as if it's something to be proud of. They, they have their Pride Day, their Pride Week. Yesterday, the Trans Day of Visibility that just happened to basically overshadow Easter Sunday as far as the politics and the news cycle is concerned. And we saw that ridiculous Admiral Robert Levin. He gave a statement about trans visibility to replace Easter, etc. And let's not be circumspect or vague or ambiguous about this. Any adult that speaks to a child about transgenderism and paints a rosy picture of it in an attempt to indoctrinate that child into this malicious practice is attempting to manipulate that child into acquiring a psychological disorder with a 40% suicide rate. Let's not miss that mark. Now, I know this is much less mellow than I want my Mellow Mondays to be, and I'm working on that, guys. I really am, I promise. But let's mellow it out a little bit, and we're going to look at this article. This researcher asked kids, "What's wrong with U.S. schools?" Here are their ideas. This first line, this is a caption for the image. So before we go forward in the article, let me show you the image. This is a map demonstrating so obviously this is a map of the U.S. with labels of foreign countries. What this illustrates is the kids from these states in the U.S. went to these foreign countries as foreign exchange students. So the kids that participated in the study and answered the questions are kids from the U.S. and by state, these are the countries that they did a foreign exchange program with. I did a student foreign exchange program when I was in high school, and my sister and I went on the same exchange program, but we had different host families, and we spent almost a month in Spain, which was freaking awesome. And not just because they had these wonderful potato omelet sandwiches and a glass of wine for lunch at the school, but we had a blast in Spain, and we saw some amazing things like monks making Damascenado art, and another monastery where they were hand carving these intricate little pastries. What are they called? Damn, the almond flour pastry. That I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was awesome. We had a ball. But it was definitely a very, very different education. Marzipan. The pastry is marzipan. So we got to watch these monks carve these intricate little pastries out of marzipan and then paint them so that they looked like porcelain sculptures. It was just amazing. But so the researcher asked, this is not news. America does pretty badly when it goes up against other countries academically. And okay, so this article was just updated a few days ago, but it was originally published in 2015. This is an older article with a recent update. I'm not sure what the update was, but none of this information is especially new, but it's worth discussing. So this is true if we take it one state at a time. No single state, no matter how wealthy or small, matches the top scoring countries, and yet the U.S. spends more per student than many other countries in the world. And that's something worth knowing. We've talked about it on the show before. It costs less per student to send your kid to a private school. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't pay the property taxes, which fund the government school that's stealing and wasting your money. But I think we said it was like 11 grand for the Peachtree Academy, where our buddy Janice Van Ness owns the school, and that's a private school. And Sergeant Major, you might remember the figure better than I do, but I think the number was like $18,000 per student per year for the public school, which is just psychotic. They, they tell us, oh, we don't have enough money. We don't have enough money. I'm like, are you paying for the lights? Like, is that coming out of your budget, or is that coming out of the county budget or the state budget? And oh, wait, you get federal endowments too? Well, we don't pay the teachers enough. Well, that's interesting because I tend to leave a small tip when my water glass doesn't get refilled enough. So maybe if they did a job that mattered, we could have a different conversation. But they're failing every metric. So in the image at the top, each state is mapped to a country that had similar scores on the program for international student assessment and international test of mathematical reasoning given to 15-year-olds. The top 15 countries are in purple. No, there isn't any purple on this map. So, yeah. She started asking random people what they thought, and she followed up on their ideas. The same theories came up over and over. People blamed poverty and diversity for the difference between U.S. students and students everywhere else. But when Ripley dug into the numbers, she discovered that while those are factors, they don't fully explain the difference. And I'm sorry, they blame poverty and diversity? Good, bad, right, or wrong, the fact of the matter is there are very few places on the planet Earth that are as diverse as the U.S. In the true meaning of the word, right? Normally, when in the U.S., when they use the word diversity, what they mean is not white. But the word diversity, not common, uncommon factors distributed across a group. You cannot find a substantially more diverse place in the world than the United States. There are some states individually which are less diverse than others, but as a country, we really are pretty well mixed up here. And I mean that in all of its clever implications as well, by the way. So she said no adult could give her a satisfactory answer, so she went to the experts, kids. Now, we hear this idea often, and I gotta say, I'm skeptical whenever you tell me that the experts on a topic are kids. But in this particular case, expert probably isn't the right word. What you're really talking about is engaging with those who have the most direct, immediate, firsthand experience. Now, that is a valuable metric, but it is far from the same as being an expert. Right? So take that with a grain of salt. But she surveyed hundreds of exchange students and found three major points they all agreed on. The students all said that in their host countries, school is harder. There's less homework, but the material is more rigorous. Now, this is something that first point, I was terrible about homework when I was a kid. And I know my mom and dad are watching, and I love you, and I know I was a pain in the ass with the homework. And early on, it was, well, this just gets in my way. I am not interested in spending the 4 or 5 hours that remain in my day doing the thing that I spent the last 6 or 8 hours doing. It's insane, right? Part of it, I was a lazy kid that wasn't interested in doing homework and I'd rather watch cartoons. That's absolutely a part of it. But that is not terribly distinct from this. You have a job. You go do your job. It's a 9-to-5 job. You want to be in bed by 10 o'clock so that you can wake up at a reasonable hour in the morning. Do you want to spend all of the time that you have between the time that you get home after your 1-hour commute from work, so you're home at 6, assuming you clocked out right at 5, you got 4 hours in which you're going to eat dinner and then go to bed at 10. You want to spend all of the time that you're not at the table, assuming you don't spend that time doing it as well, even thinking about, let alone doing, the job that you just spent your 8 hours on? Well, the obvious answer is fuck no. It was my considered opinion when I was in high school, and by the way, had a job. So I would go to school and then I would go to work and then I would come home. And it was my considered opinion then that, hey, aren't we paying you to teach me stuff at school? Why, if I come here for instruction, do I need to spend the rest of my time doing your job for you? Now, quite separately, I will grant this. Individual study, which includes a deep reading of valuable and complex material, has extreme value. Extreme value. Right? You go to basic philosophy at college and you're studying Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethic, then yeah, you have class where you discuss and then you read the text when you go home. But you know what you don't do? You don't spend 4 hours filling out a fucking multiple choice worksheet asking you to pick the correct answer from 3 ridiculous options to a question that you had never even cared to formulate because it was written by a teacher who can't be bothered to do the work to begin with, and so the question is not useful, valuable, or insightful. So this idea that school is harder over there and they're made to engage with the material in the classroom with the teacher, taking the education more seriously. What we have in America is essentially you show up to class, you review your homework, and this was true in the 90s when I was in a public school. Today they inject some tranny ideology in there while they're doing it, but here's how public school classes generally go, or at least they did in the 90s when I was there. You show up to the class, you show that you did your homework last night. The teacher tells you what the correct answers to last night's homework was, right? That's the first half of the class. The next chunk of the class is the lowest common denominator asking questions that are unrelated to the subject matter. And then you're given your next homework assignment, having addressed maybe in 10% of the class, having actually addressed new material. It's not that the children aren't learning in the school. It is that they are not being taught. Instead, why don't you begin the class by asking, does anybody have questions from last week? Pay close attention to the time. Waste no more than 10 to 15 minutes on that in a 45-minute class, and then engage the new topic. And the only reason I say that you can spend the 10 to 15 on seeing if anybody has questions about the last class's topic is because ideally you've got a lesson plan that strings the topics together and they're related. So, you might go from talking about the surrender at Appomattox to the signing of the treaty there. And, the last battle was the thing you talked about last week, and it dovetails into the conversation of this week's class, right? Maybe last week you started on imaginary numbers and the basic concept of the square root of -1 is I, and now you're going to start working on, okay, what happens when you have I squared in an equation? Let's dig into that this week. Do you understand the imaginary numbers? Okay, now we're going to talk about minus I and I squared and the square root of I this week. Okay, cool. So a little review can be useful there. But y'all, academic burnout is a real thing. And I guarantee you that especially your prepubescent children are extremely vulnerable to that. The next thing they said is sports are just a hobby. Um, that I'm not sure what I think about that. I don't know. That's a tricky one. And I say that because in the U.S., sports are more than just a hobby for a narrow subset of children. Now, it may be that children who are involved in sports generally in the public schools or even private schools, the children that are involved in sports are more actively involved in the school itself as an organization and therefore more likely to be involved in and overrepresented in the sampling data for something like children that do the exchange student program. Like using myself as an example, I wasn't. I never played sports in school. I did. I studied Shaolin Kung Fu when we were in Maine when I was in high school, which was completely separate from the high school that I attended. So there wasn't any engagement there that would have altered my sampling position in a data set like this. But I was very involved then in the band, the choir, and the drama club, which are not the same as sports, but probably include a similar sampling bias, especially since they tend to engage in correlated activities like the marching band. We would play at football games sometimes and stuff like that. So there's a bit of sampling bias there, but I don't know that the sports are just a hobby thing is a really salient data point for this particular conversation because of those discrepancies. But the last piece here, I actually found very interesting. It says kids believe there's something in it for them. The students in other countries deeply believe that what they are doing in school affects how interesting their lives are going to be. Even if they don't like a class, they see their education as a stepping stone to their future. Now, I believe there's a link to the article below if you guys want to go watch Amanda Ripley's video on YouTube. You feel free to go check that out. We are not going to watch it here, but at the end of the day, my conclusion is simply this: American schools they're a threat. Sending your child to a school, public or private, in the United States today, and that includes all of academia, by the way. There are some standout private colleges like Hillsdale that are an exception, but by a broad margin, what the greater public generally regards as the whole body of academia is a gross indoctrination system that, if you are very lucky, they will neglect your child instead of going out of their way to cause them harm. So if you are a parent of school-age children, I not only beg you or demand of you, I enjoin you to retract them from that threat and do what needs to be done, which is to educate your children. Right? We homeschool. I bought my kids laptops 2 years ago, so I might have to replace. It's been long enough that I might be replacing laptops one at a time this year. We'll see what happens. And I think it's going to be my eldest, my 13-year-old daughter, who's going to have to get her laptop replaced first, because unbeknownst to me, this just out of left field, The other day she was telling me, yeah, so I found this Python sandbox and I started playing with it because I thought it was kind of interesting. I'm like, yeah, yeah, out there in the chat, real quick, raise your hand if you even understand the sentence I just uttered. I do, because I have a particular background, but I found a Python sandbox and I thought it was fun to play around in. Let me translate that for you. My 13-year-old daughter got on her laptop and found a space that she could use not to be taught a programming language and learn how to write code and create computer programs. No. She went and found a coding space where she could teach it to herself through trial and error because she thought that it might be interesting. Not because her mother or I have any background or ever discussed the topic in front of her, right? Because she's probably aware. She's probably heard me tell her that I did some work with a machine learning project for galactic imagery identification, but we haven't had an in-depth conversation about that. And she's just out there writing a little program that is basically a cartoon. I mean, a very, very simple, like 8-bit graphic snake going around the screen. But believe it or not, there's a lot of code involved in that. You know, what color is the snake? How long is the snake? When does it turn left or right? How far does it move left or right? Over what time period does it move? How fast does it move? How is the speed of its movement related to the distance of coverage as required to fill the period of time? There's a lot of data that goes into that. So she might just have to start getting smart on. I might have to start getting smart on how to help her if that's what she wants to pursue. And that is because she has the academic liberty at home to study and pursue interests rather than to memorize a bunch of useless dates. Right? Don't get me wrong. 1776 was a big fucking deal. And knowing why 1776 was a big deal is important. But let me ask you this. As a practical matter, if you know what the Constitution is and have studied it enough to understand how it affects your life, what value have you ever experienced from knowing the date of its ratification? And that's basically all that public school is. Simple math and rote memorization. It's useless. I mean, the simple math is useful, obviously, but it's very simple math without the opportunity for deep exploration. I'm gonna share this anecdote. Mom, you remember this. I was suspended once for the offense of towering. Literally, there was a slip written by the principal, and it said the reason for my suspension was towering. I've been 6.5 feet tall for a long damn time. This particular story, here's what happened. The actual thing that got me suspended was I stood up out of my desk. You know, it was one of those desks where it's the chair attached to the desk, and I'm this guy. So I've been a giant for a long time. I used to have to stand up and kind of slide the desk off because they were so small. And I was in a class. I was reminded of the story a moment ago when I was talking about imaginary numbers. So I was in a class with a teacher named Mr. Beaumont, and we used to call him Bonaparte. Not just because he was a small guy, or not just, I mean, he was a small guy. He had a bit of a Napoleon complex. He's a great guy. He was actually one of my favorite teachers at the time. Mr. Beaumont was a veteran, and I don't think he wanted to be there as a teacher. I'm pretty sure that he was a veteran that took the Troops to Teachers program to pay off some additional student loans after he had left the Army. But he was a veteran. He was a good guy. He was a sharp guy. And he was teaching algebra. And so we're in Algebra 2, and we're learning about imaginary numbers. And toward the end of the class, I asked the question. I put my hand up, and I asked the question, when are we going to use this? And he turned and looked at me, and I saw the fire in his eyes, like, you little son of a bitch. What? And I put my hands up, and I said, whoa. I'm sorry. Look, I'm not being an asshole. I'm not trying to be a jerk, right? My question is not, well, why should I bother studying this? I'm never going to need it. No, I'm legitimately interested, and I said this to him. I said, no, I'm legitimately interested in what professional field or academic study might I pursue that this would be a useful and applicable piece of information. Are the imaginary numbers used for rocket science, for quantum physics, for astrophysics? What kind of math would I pursue to learn more about imaginary numbers? I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm not trying to say I don't need this because I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm curious as to what I might do that I might need to know this. And he lost his shit, and he threw his marker at me, and then he threw the eraser at me, and then he stormed at me, and I stood up and took the desk off and looked down at him. I actually expected that he was ready to throw a punch. But he stormed up to me, and he said something about, just because you have hair on your face, you think you can talk to me like an adult. And I'm like, well, I was trying to learn something, yo. And he pointed out the door, and he said, go to the principal's office. And they suspended me. And so it was a fun little anecdote. And that was a lot of my academic career, was being, and again, I really liked Mr. Beaumont. But a great deal of my academic career was spent dealing with teachers who didn't have enough education to answer questions given an intelligent student. I was plagued by it. Just low midwits trying to speak to an intelligent person. I had to get most of that education at a Waffle House, with books. And a mean old bald man. Penny Rod's not watching this morning. Got a lot of that education out of a mean old bald man and a stack of fucking books. So, thanks for watching this morning, guys. I think we had a pretty good show, despite it being so difficult to find good news stories to cover on a mellow Monday morning. But we love you. Y'all be safe out there. Good luck with your April Fool's Days, and we will see you tomorrow. Hey, one last little thing before I shut it all the way down. So the email address is theshow@brushfiremind.com, or I'm just gonna do this real quick. Or you can go over here to brushfiremind.com, right? And there's the merch store where you can get your t-shirts, like the enemy is filled with chewy nougat t-shirt. You can click here to buy me a coffee. We always appreciate your donations and your assistance. But right here, you've got drop us a line. You can send us an email it'll go to the show. That's all one word, the show @brushfiremind.com. Or again, just go to brushfiremind.com and use the contact form here. And you send us an email. If any of you are interested, feel free to send me an email with an address that I can ship to. I have got an absolute metric shit ton of these Brushfire Mind logo stickers, and I would love for you guys to put them on your bumpers, on your coffee cups, on your on your Stanley mugs, on your laptops, your phones, whatever. If you want one of those stickers, drop us a line, the show at brushfiremind.com, and I'll send you a sticker. Dad, I'll just bring you some the next time I'm over. And I'd be happy to send those out to you, because I've got a shitload of them. I'm not going to be able to use them all. I put them on stuff like, right? But there are limits. I think I've got about 300 of them. So, yeah. Y'all pop over to the website, buy us a coffee, get some merch, or drop us a line, and I'll send you a sticker. And y'all be safe out there. Love you.